The high-ranking Iranian leader rushed to China to negotiate an urgent way out of the war, but in Beijing he received a terrible message that Tehran did not expect: more pressure to end a crisis that already threatens oil, ships, and the Chinese economy. This Wednesday, May 6, 2026, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araqi arrived in the Chinese capital trying to seek political protection, economic support, and a negotiation channel between Iran and the United States. But China, the largest buyer of Iranian oil, made it clear that it wants safe maritime passage, trade to keep functioning, and an end to a senseless war that has also started to harm Beijing's interests. Iran was hoping to find an ally willing to confront Washington to the end. It found a cold, calculating power, concerned first with its own ships, its refineries, its exports, and its energy security. Arakixi's anger exposes a cornered regime, pressured by American sanctions, attacks at sea, economic crisis, and growing isolation. Tehran tried to turn Hormuz into a weapon of global blackmail, but ended up scaring off China, the very buyer that keeps much of the Iranian economy afloat. Now, the trip that was supposed to show strength is starting to reveal weakness. The Iranian foreign minister has left Tehran to seek diplomatic breathing room, but he heard from Beijing that the crisis needs to end because the closure of Hormuz also affects China. That's when the pressure moves to the other side. In addition to facing pressure from the United States to end this senseless war by the Revolutionary Guard, Iran now has to deal with demands from its own partner, who doesn't want to pay the price for a war created by the Revolutionary Guard in the heart of the Gulf. I'll tell you all about this in a moment. Now you'll want to be subscribed to the channel to stay well informed. Real-time information with the best journalistic quality you've ever seen. Milson Alves News, the standard in credibility. Abbas Araqi didn't go to China on an ordinary trip. He went because the Iranian regime is cornered. Iran attacked commercial vessels, threatened the passage of ships, provoked the United States, and turned Hormuz into an economic time bomb. But that same strait is vital for China, which depends on Middle Eastern oil to keep its industry running. Reuters reported that the war involving the United States, Israel, and Iran caused a historic shock in the global oil supply, directly threatening China's energy security. In other words, Tehran tried to use Hormuz as a weapon against the world, but it also hit Beijing in the wallet. That's where China's betrayal becomes clear in a cold, calculated way. China received the Iranian foreign minister. They maintained diplomatic rhetoric and spoke about negotiation, but also called for the resumption of normal and safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz. For Iran, this sounds like support. In practice, it's pressure. Beijing doesn't want to see its supplier fall, but it also doesn't want that supplier to shut off the tap through which a vital part of the energy that drives its economy flows. Iran rushed to ask for protection, but found China concerned first with ships, oil, and... The meeting took place in Beijing, just before Donald Trump's scheduled trip to China, set for May 14 and 15. This detail raises the stakes of the crisis. Trump wants to discuss Iran directly with Xi Jinping, while Washington pressures Chinese banks and refineries that buy Iranian oil. The US Treasury has already targeted Chinese refineries, and the Chinese government responded with an unusual measure. It ordered companies within China not to comply with American sanctions. American sanctions against 5 refineries accused of buying Iranian oil. Among them is Hengli Petrochemical, sanctioned by the United States for multi-billion-dollar purchases of Iranian oil. This is the point that makes Araqi's diplomatic escape even more serious. Iran needs China to survive economically. According to data cited by Reuters, China bought more than 80% of the oil exported by Iranian ships in 2025. Without this buyer, the Iranian regime loses cash, loses momentum, and loses the leeway to sustain its external operations. That's why the Iranian foreign minister didn't go to Beijing just to talk. He went there to try to shore up the regime's main economic base, at a time when American sanctions and maritime blockades are starting to tighten the noose around Tehran's neck. While Araqi was seeking support, Trump announced the temporary pause of the Freedom Project, an American operation created to help commercial ships cross the Strait of Hormuz with military protection. The pause was justified as an attempt to make room for an agreement with Iran, but the pressure did not end. Reuters reported that Trump said there was great progress toward an understanding, but he also made it clear that the American blockade would remain in effect. In other words, Washington stopped the advance for a few days, but it did not remove the reason for that pressure: the attacks. In a press conference at the United States Department of War, General Dan Caney stated that, since the announcement of the ceasefire, Iran has fired at commercial vessels 9 times, seized 2 container ships, and attacked American forces more than 10 times. He also said that more than 22,500 sailors were trapped on more than 1,550 commercial vessels in the Gulf unable to transit. The human crisis is mainly seen in these trapped sailors and the blocked trade routes. The general stated that Iran also attacked Oman once and the United Arab Emirates 3 times, including an offensive against the Fujairah oil terminal, which was reportedly repelled. The American forces say they used Navy MH-60 helicopters and Army AH-64 helicopters to neutralize threats launched against commercial shipping. The American message is direct. Iran may talk about negotiation, but its military forces continue to test the limits at sea. That's why Araksi's trip to China carries a scent of political desperation. Tehran wanted to use the crisis as a tool to blackmail the world. But when China realized that its own energy, its exports, and its stability were at risk, he had to leave home and seek help. The foreign minister went to Beijing saying that Iran would only accept a fair and comprehensive agreement. But the real scenario shows something else. The regime wants to buy time, avoid new military strikes, and prevent its biggest oil buyer from backing down in the face of American sanctions. China, in turn, is playing on 2 fronts. On one hand, it blocks American sanctions against Chinese refineries to protect its sovereignty and maintain access to Iranian oil. On the other hand, it asks for the passage through Hormuz to return to normal because it doesn't want the Revolutionary Guard to turn the Gulf into a black hole for trade. That's Beijing's calculation. Iran can be useful as a partner against Washington, but it stops being useful when it threatens the energy that powers Chinese factories, ports, ships, and exports. This contradiction explains why the word betrayal is used. It's not about a betrayal announced in a public speech. It's a betrayal driven by self-interest. Iran expected automatic protection, but China is looking out for its own ships, its own contracts, and its own meeting with Trump. When Beijing says that safe passage in Hormuz needs to be restored, it pushes Tehran to negotiate. When Washington threatens secondary sanctions, it pushes Beijing to choose between defending Iran to the end or preserving its economic ties to the global system. History shows that closing maritime routes almost never ends well for those who try to use straits as a political weapon. In 1967, Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt closed the Strait of Tiran to Israeli ships, isolating a sensitive route and escalating the crisis with Israel. A few days later, the region was drawn into the Six-Day War. The lesson is simple. When a nation tries to turn a maritime passage into a tool of pressure, the problem leaves ordinary diplomacy and enters the realm of force, economics, and strategic survival. Other nations also learned that relying on powerful allies doesn't mean getting a blank check. North Korea has historically depended on China to survive economically, but Beijing alternates between support, pressure, and control when Pyongyang threatens to give up. Demais a região. Russia, under Western sanctions, sells energy to Asian partners, but it has to accept discounts, difficult routes, and growing dependence on buyers who think of their own interests first. Venezuela sought external support when its economy collapsed, but found that allies also demand a political price. Iran is now entering that same corridor, asking for help, but finds a China that calculates every move. Now the next step must come from 3 fronts. The first is the negotiation between the United States and Iran, with indirect mediation and pressure from Trump to close a deal. The second is China's position, which can help push Tehran to the table because it also suffers from the Strait of Hormuz being closed. The third is the behavior of the Revolutionary Guard, which can sabotage any progress if it continues attacking ships, neighbors, and American forces in the Gulf. In the end, the central fact is straightforward. China still talks to Iran, but it has already made it clear that it does not want to be dragged into the losses of a war created by Tehran's provocations. I am Milson Alves, an international affairs specialist, and my purpose is to keep you well informed with the truth every day. The news links are in the video description. Like this video, subscribe, and check the comments at the end to stay engaged with the Milson Alves community.